The final image of her in that mediation room is seared into my memory. Not the beautiful woman I had married, but a cornered animal, face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly manicured hands, which I had held and admired for a decade, were curled into claws as she lunged across the polished mahogany table. Security guards, men far larger than me, were struggling to restrain her as she screamed obscenities, her voice cracking with the sheer force of her fury. Her mother, Eleanor, was frozen in her chair, her mouth a perfect O of shock, her own carefully constructed world crumbling around her daughter. All of this chaos erupted because of a simple, undeniable truth I had just laid bare. A truth I had guarded for years, waiting for the right person to share it with. It turned out the right time was not to share it with a lover, but to use it as a weapon against an enemy. She had thought I was a simple man, a predictable, stable, and ultimately disposable foundation for the life she truly wanted. She was right about the stable part. A foundation is designed to bear a tremendous load, but it is also designed to outlast the structure built upon it, especially when that structure is rotten to the core. Had she ever truly tried to understand the man she married? Had she ever wondered what lay beneath the calm, methodical surface? The answer, I now know, is no. And her ignorance cost her everything. My name is David. I am 42 years old, and for most of my adult life, I have been a structural engineer. It's a profession that suits my temperament. I find comfort in physics, in the immutable laws that govern stress and load, tension and compression. I build things that last. I analyze weaknesses and reinforce them. My life, much like my work, was built on a framework of routine and predictability. I woke up at 6, ran 3 miles, showered, ate the same breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, and drove my sensible sedan to the office. I worked for a large, reputable firm, earned a respectable salary, and came home at 5:30 every evening. For 10 years, that home included Clara. Clara was the opposite of everything I was. She was vibrant, spontaneous, and emotional. Where I saw blueprints and calculations, she saw color palettes and possibilities. I was drawn to her light, and for a long time I believed she was drawn to my stability. I thought we complemented each other, two different materials forming a stronger composite. I loved her, and I showed it in the only way I knew how, by providing a solid, unwavering foundation for her life. When she decided she wanted to open a high-end women's clothing boutique, I didn't question it. I saw the business plan, a document more hopeful than factual, and knew it was a financial risk. But it was her dream. So I remortgaged the house I had owned before we met and funded her venture. I paid the rent on the trendy downtown storefront. I covered the payroll for her 2 employees. For 5 years, I funneled a significant portion of my salary into what was, for all intents and purposes, her very expensive hobby. I never complained. I saw the joy it brought her, the sense of purpose she felt arranging Italian silks and French perfumes. I would come home, my mind tired from calculating wind shear on a new skyscraper, and she would be full of stories about her day, about the wealthy clients who frequented her shop. I would listen, nod, and feel a quiet satisfaction that I could provide this for her. I believed we were a team. I was the silent, load-bearing column, and she was the beautiful, ornate facade. It was a structure I was proud of. The first cracks in that facade began to appear subtly. Little comments, sharp as glass shards, slipped into our conversations. My friend Jennifer's husband just made partner. They're buying a place on the lake? Or, God, David, do we have to drive this boring car forever? Her time with her mother, Eleanor, increased. Eleanor had never fully approved of me. She saw me as sturdy but uninspired, a safe bet but not the winning lottery ticket she felt her daughter deserved. After their long lunches, Clara would come home filled with a specific kind of discontent, a restlessness that permeated our quiet evenings. Then came Julian. His name started popping up in her stories from the boutique. Julian, the real estate developer Julian, who had vision Julian, who understood the importance of branding and aggressive expansion. He was, in her telling, everything I was not, a risk-taker, a man of wealth and influence, a player in a much bigger game. She started dressing differently, her already expensive tastes becoming astronomical. Dinners with friends I was not invited to became a regular occurrence. "It's a networking thing, sweetie," she would say, kissing my cheek as she left in a cloud of perfume that cost more than my monthly car payment. "You would be bored to tears." I accepted it. I trusted her. It was my critical design flaw. The inciting incident, the moment the entire structure of my life failed, was mundane. It was a Tuesday night. Clara was out at another networking dinner. I was cleaning up the kitchen when I saw her laptop open on the counter, its screen glowing. I walked over simply to close it, to protect it from any spills. But it was open to her email, and a chat window was active on the side of the screen. The name at the top was Julian. My hand froze over the trackpad. I knew I shouldn't look. It was a violation of privacy, a line I had never crossed. But a cold, logical instinct, the same one that tells me to double-check a weld or rerun a stress analysis, took over. I read the messages. The words were a wrecking ball. They were graphic, detailing a physical intimacy that made my stomach clench. But that was not the worst part. The true betrayal was in the financial details. "Just a little longer, babe," Julian had written. "Once boring David gets his annual bonus, you can pull it from the joint account. That's the seed money we need for the Miami project." Clara's reply: "I know. It's like taking candy from a baby. He never even checks the statements. He just works his little engineering job and thinks he's a provider. It's almost pathetic. My providing for her, funding her dream, was pathetic. My stability was a joke to them. My love was a resource to be exploited." I scrolled up, reading weeks of their correspondence. They mocked my clothes, my car, my friends. They had a nickname for me, the calculator. "Is the calculator home yet?" Julian would ask. "No, the machine is still at the factory," she would reply. They were planning a trip to the Cayman Islands, a celebration, for after they secured my bonus. They were discussing which lawyers she should hire for the divorce, how to frame it to maximize her settlement. She wrote about how she would feign heartbreak, how she would paint me as a neglectful, emotionally distant husband to the judge. I stood there in the silent kitchen for what felt like an hour, the light from the screen illuminating the utter ruin of my marriage. There was no screaming rage. There was no crushing wave of sorrow. The engineer in me took over. I felt a profound, chilling calm. The structure had failed. The design was flawed from the beginning. It was not a time for emotion. It was a time for a controlled demolition. I closed the laptop. I took a photo of the screen with my phone. Then I went into my home office, closed the door, and I began to work. My new project was not a building of steel and glass, but the systematic deconstruction of a life built on lies. My first call was not to a divorce lawyer. It was to Mark. Mark is my oldest friend, from our university days. While I went into engineering, he went into finance, eventually becoming a forensic accountant. He specialized in untangling the complex, deliberately obscured financial webs of messy divorces and corporate fraud. He was as methodical and detail-oriented as I was. He answered on the second ring. "Mark," I said, my voice even. "I have a problem I need you to look at." "David? It's 10 o'clock at night. Everything okay?" "No," I said simply. "But it will be." I explained the situation to him, not with the emotion of a betrayed husband, but with the dispassionate clarity of an engineer reporting a catastrophic structural failure. I recounted the messages, the financial plans, the nickname. I sent him the photo I had taken. He was silent for a long moment after I finished. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold steel. "Okay, first rule, David. You say nothing, not a single word. You do not confront her. You do not act hurt or angry. You become a ghost. Your normalcy is now your most powerful weapon. She expects an emotional reaction. We are going to give her a logical one, and it will destroy her." This was the turning point. Any lingering desire I had to scream, to demand answers, to salvage something from the wreckage, evaporated. Mark's words resonated with the core of my being. An emotional outburst was a chaotic, unpredictable force. A logical, evidence-based strategy was a controlled, precise instrument. I had spent my life designing systems to withstand chaos. Now I would become one. What's the first step? I asked. Documentation, he said. We build a case so airtight that she will suffocate. We need every bank statement, every credit card bill, every tax return for the last 5 years. We need to prove that the boutique was not a marital enterprise but a marital drain, a hobby funded exclusively by your income. We need to quantify every dollar you poured into it. The next day, I began my work in earnest. I told Clara I had to pull some old files for a tax audit at work, a plausible lie that gave me cover to spend hours in the home office. I downloaded a decade of our financial history. I created a master spreadsheet, a beautiful and terrible document of our life together, measured in debits and credits. I color-coded every expense. Green for my personal spending, which was minimal, blue for our shared household expenses, and red for Clara. The sea of red was staggering. The boutique was a black hole of cash. Inventory from designers in Paris, rent on a prime commercial space, salaries for employees, advertising, professional photography. It was a constant, relentless drain. And beyond that were her personal expenses. Thousands of dollars a month on clothes, spa treatments, lunches, and trips I had no part in. My salary, which I had always considered substantial, was barely enough to keep us afloat and her dream alive. His bonus, the one they were banking on, was the only thing that filled the gap each year. I saw it all with horrifying clarity. I was not her husband. I was her financier, and my line of credit was about to be revoked. Mark advised me to hire a private investigator. We need to document the affair in a way that is irrefutable in court, he explained. Photos, dates, times. We need to establish that she is spending marital assets on her paramour. I felt a flicker of distaste at the idea, but I suppressed it. This was not about feelings, it was about data. I met with a discreet professional Mark recommended, a former police detective with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I gave him Julian's name and a photograph of Clara. I authorized him to put a GPS tracker on the car she drove, which was registered and paid for in my name. While the investigator began his work, I moved to the next phase, building a financial fortress. I went to my bank, the same one I had used for 20 years. I sat down with the branch manager, a man who had known me since I opened my first checking account. I explained, in vague but firm terms, that I needed to protect my assets from potential misappropriation. I opened a new private account at a different bank. I filled out the forms to have my salary redirected there, effective immediately. Then I went to our joint accounts. I systematically began transferring my premarital assets, the money I had inherited from my parents and the savings I had accumulated before meeting Clara, into a secure trust that Mark helped me establish overnight. It was a significant sum, far more than Clara knew I possessed. The final move was the most delicate. I called the credit card company. I reported that I suspected fraudulent activity on our primary joint card, the one Clara used for everything. I didn't cancel it. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I had them lower the credit limit to a paltry $1,000, citing a new bank policy for accounts with suspected vulnerabilities. I knew the call would come, and it did a few days later. I was in my office, reviewing blueprints for a new bridge, when my phone rang. It was Clara. Her voice was sharp, annoyed. "David, my card was just declined at Neiman's. It was so embarrassing. What is going on?" I feigned surprise and concern. "That's strange. Let me check." I put her on hold for a minute, then came back. "I see the problem. I got an email from the bank a few days ago. They're cracking down on fraud. They've lowered the limits on a lot of accounts temporarily. I must have forgotten to tell you. I'm so sorry, honey. I'll call them and get it sorted out." "Well, hurry up," she snapped. "I have a cart full of things here." "I'll do my best," I said calmly, knowing full well that the limit was there to stay. I had cut off her main supply line. Throughout this entire period, I maintained a facade of absolute normalcy at home. I came home at the same time. I cooked dinner. I asked about her day at the boutique. I listened to her complain about the terrible economy and her fickle customers. My composure was absolute. It was the most difficult acting job of my life, sitting across the dinner table from a woman who was actively plotting my financial ruin, and discussing which show we should watch on television. She took my quietness for acquiescence, my continued routine as proof of my ignorance. Her arrogance was my greatest ally. She saw the same old boring, predictable David. She had no idea that the calculator was running the most important analysis of his life. The reports from the private investigator started coming in. They were delivered in plain manila envelopes to a post office box I had opened. The contents were clinical and devastating. Photos of Clara and Julian having lunch at expensive restaurants, holding hands. Photos of them kissing outside his apartment building. GPS logs showed her car parked at his address overnight several times a week. The investigator also did a background check on Julian. As I had suspected, he was not the successful developer he claimed to be. He was a grifter with a string of failed businesses, lawsuits, and 2 bankruptcies to his name. He preyed on women with access to money. Clara was not his partner. She was his mark. The final piece of the PI's report was the most damning. He had managed to get audio from a restaurant where Clara and Julian were having dinner. Their table was next to a large potted plant where the investigator had placed a small recording device. I listened to the recording in my car, parked in an empty lot. Their voices were clear. "He's getting his bonus next Friday," Clara said. 150,000. I saw the email from his boss. "Perfect," Julian purred. "As soon as it hits the account, you transfer it to the holding company I set up. Then you tell him you want a separation. Your lawyer will file on Monday. We'll be in Miami before he even knows what hit him." "What about the boutique?" she asked. "Forget the boutique," Julian said dismissively. "It's a money pit. Let David have the debt. It's half his anyway in a divorce. We're moving on to bigger things, baby." I turned off the recording. The coldness of it was breathtaking. There was not a shred of guilt or remorse in her voice. It was a business transaction. I drove home, my face a mask of stone. That night, she told me she had to go on a buying trip for the boutique over the weekend. The PI's report confirmed she and Julian had checked into a luxury resort 2 hours away, a trip they paid for with one of the few remaining joint credit cards I hadn't yet locked down. They were celebrating their future. A few weeks later, Clara escalated her own plan. She sat me down on the sofa, her expression a careful performance of serious concern. "David," she began, "I think we need to talk about the house." "Okay," I said, my heart rate steady. "It's a seller's market," she continued, reciting lines she had clearly rehearsed. "This house is so big for just the 2 of us. We could sell it, take the equity, and invest it. Be smarter with our capital. We could downsize, maybe rent a cool loft downtown for a while." I knew what she was doing. She wanted to liquidate our primary asset. Our capital meant her capital for Julian's scam. I looked at her, this woman I had loved, and felt nothing but a profound sense of pity. She was so blinded by greed that she couldn't see the abyss she was walking towards. "I'll have to think about that, Clara," I said, my voice neutral. "It's a big decision. Don't think too long," she said, a new edge in her voice. "Opportunities like this don't last forever." My bonus was scheduled for direct deposit on the last Friday of the month. On the Thursday before, I made my move. I decided a public, neutral space was best. I texted her, "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow morning before you open the shop? There's something important we need to discuss." She agreed, probably assuming I was going to talk about selling the house. We met at a small cafe, a place with little tables and the smell of roasted coffee beans. She looked radiant, dressed in an expensive outfit, confident and smug. She believed she was one day away from her new life. I let her order her complicated latte. I just had a black coffee. We sat in a small booth. "So," she began, a bright, false smile on her face. "What's this all about?" I didn't speak. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a single 8x10 photograph. It was from the PI. A crystal-clear shot of her and Julian, locked in a passionate kiss on the balcony of their hotel room at the resort. I slid it across the table. The color drained from her face. Her smile vanished. She stared at the picture, her mouth opening and closing silently. For the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine shock on her face. "Where did you get this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That's not the relevant question, Clara," I said, my voice low and steady. "The relevant question is, who is Julian?" Her shock quickly morphed into predictable rage. "It was a defense mechanism. You spied on me? You had me followed? You sick bastard. This is your fault. You were never present. You were always working. Always so boring and predictable. I needed someone who was alive." I let her rant. I took a slow sip of my coffee. I did not raise my voice. When she paused to take a breath, I spoke again. "I know about the plan for my bonus. I know about the Miami project. I know about your nickname for me." The calculator, her eyes widened. This was not going according to her script. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "I also know," I continued, ignoring her denial, "that the boutique has lost an average of $70,000 a year for the past 5 years. A total loss of over $350,000. Money that came directly from my salary. I have the records. I have the spreadsheets." I stood up, leaving my coffee untouched. "You will be served with divorce papers this afternoon, Clara. I suggest you find a very good lawyer, though I doubt you can afford one now." I walked out of the cafe, leaving her sitting there with the photograph, her entire world collapsing in the space of 5 minutes. The aftermath was swift and brutal for her. My bonus was deposited the next day, not into our joint account, which now had a balance of $47, but into my new private one. She must have tried to access the funds 100 times. A week later, Julian disappeared. The PI confirmed he had cleared out the boutique's business account, which contained the last few $1,000s of her operating cash, and had left the state. His phone was disconnected. He was gone. He had played her as thoroughly as she had intended to play me. Then came the phone call from her mother. I was at my new apartment, a minimalist, furnished place I had rented downtown. I had packed a single suitcase and left the house, leaving Clara with the mortgage, the bills, and the crushing weight of her own choices. "David!" Eleanor shrieked into the phone, her voice a piercing drill. "What have you done? Clara is a wreck. You threw her out. You froze her accounts. You monster." "Eleanor," I said calmly, "I did not throw her out. I left. The house and the mortgage are still there. As for the accounts, I simply secured my own finances. You should be asking your daughter what she has done." "She told me everything," she screamed. "You were a cold, neglectful husband. You drove her to it. Did she also tell you that she and her boyfriend were planning to steal $150,000 from me and flee to Miami?" I asked. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "That's a lie," she finally sputtered, but the conviction was gone from her voice. "Goodbye, Eleanor," I said, and hung up the phone. The final act took place 3 months later, in a sterile mediation room at the law firm Mark had recommended. Clara had been forced to hire a cheap, overworked lawyer who looked like he was already defeated. She was there with her mother, who glared at me with pure hatred. Clara herself looked diminished. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by something off the rack. Her face was pale and drawn. The vibrant light I had once been so drawn to had been extinguished. Her lawyer began, his voice droning as he laid out their demands. "Half the value of the house, permanent alimony, half of my savings and retirement accounts, and for me to assume all marital debt, including the failing boutique." It was a fantasy, a desperate opening salvo with no basis in reality. Mark just smiled. He let the man finish. Then he placed the first of 3 thick binders on the polished table. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Binder 1, Mark announced, his voice filling the quiet room, "is a complete record of Mrs. Peterson's adulterous affair with one Julian Croft. It includes photographs, hotel receipts paid for with marital funds, GPS tracking data, and a sworn affidavit from a licensed private investigator. It also contains a full background check on Mr. Croft, detailing his history of fraud and bankruptcy. We have established irrefutably that marital assets were used to fund this affair. Clara flinched. Her lawyer's face tightened. Eleanor looked confused. Mark placed the second binder on the table. Another thud. Binder 2 is a full forensic accounting of the business known as Clara's Closet. It proves, conclusively, that the boutique was never profitable. It was a personal hobby funded exclusively by my client's non-marital and marital income. As your client was the sole proprietor, all business debts, including the commercial lease and outstanding vendor invoices, are hers and hers alone. We have statements showing she recently drained the business account of its last remaining funds. An act of commercial fraud we are prepared to pursue. Clara's lawyer began to look pale. He was out of his depth. And finally, Mark said, placing the third and thickest binder on the table. The sound echoed like a gavel. Binder 3. This is my client's complete financial disclosure. This is when I spoke for the first time. I looked directly at Clara. Her eyes, once full of fire and contempt, were now filled with a dawning horror. You thought my salary was my worth, Clara? I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of a decade of deception. You called me the calculator. You mocked my little life. You were right about one thing. I am a calculator. I calculate everything. Mark opened the third binder. As you can see, he said, turning it for her lawyer to view, Mr. Peterson's salary from his firm is a modest annual stipend he pays himself for tax purposes. You see, he is not just a senior engineer at the firm. He is one of the 3 founding partners. He owns a 30% stake in the company, a multinational corporation with projects on 5 continents. He also holds a dozen patents for engineering innovations that generate significant annual royalties. He let that sink in. The silence in the room was absolute. Clara's lawyer was staring at the pages, his jaw slack. My client's net worth, Mark continued, his voice cutting through the silence, is not in his checking account. It is in trusts, stocks, and intellectual property, the vast majority of which was established long before he met you. His estimated net worth is in the mid-8 figures. Eleanor gasped. It was a choked, strangled sound. Clara just stared at me, her face a canvas of disbelief, fury, and a terrible, dawning comprehension of the scale of her miscalculation. I lived a simple life because that's who I am, I said to her. My car, our house, our vacations. It was all real. It was the life I wanted. I never told you about the money because I wanted someone to love me, David the engineer, not David the walking bank account. I wanted a partner, not an investor. Mark closed the binder. So here is our offer. It is not a negotiation. Mrs. Peterson will walk away with her personal belongings and the clothes on her back. She will assume all debt associated with her boutique and the credit cards she used for personal and illicit expenses. She will waive all rights to any and all of my client's assets, now and in the future. In exchange for her signing this agreement today, my client will agree not to pursue criminal charges for conspiracy to commit fraud, nor civil charges for the dissipation of marital assets. That's when she broke. The disbelief shattered, replaced by a volcanic eruption of pure rage. It was not the cry of a heartbroken woman. It was the shriek of a thwarted predator. You lied to me, she screamed, her voice raw. You lied to me this whole time. No, Clara, I said, standing up. I just never told you the whole truth. You never asked. She lunged then. A wild, desperate attack across the table. Her perfectly manicured nails were aimed at my face. The mediation devolved into chaos. Her lawyer jumped back. Her mother screamed. 2 security guards who had been standing outside the door rushed in and grabbed her. She fought them, kicking and screaming, a litany of curses and threats pouring from her mouth. I didn't watch the end of it. While they were restraining her, I simply straightened my tie, picked up my briefcase, and walked out of the room. Mark followed me. I didn't look back. The sounds of her screaming faded down the hallway. The demolition was complete. From the law firm, I drove directly to an Audi dealership. I had always admired their engineering, their understated performance. I bought an A8, a flagship sedan, in a quiet, dark gray. I paid for it with a debit card from my personal account. The salesman's eyes nearly popped out of his head. I didn't do it to be flashy. I did it because I could. because for the first time in a decade, I was making a major decision for myself and myself alone. I drove my new car to my new apartment. It was a corner unit on a high floor with panoramic views of the city skyline. It was sparsely furnished, clean, and quiet. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the thousands of buildings that made up the city. I had a hand in designing several of them. They were strong, resilient, built to withstand storms and the test of time. I thought about the life I had tried to build with Clara. I had approached it like one of my projects, with dedication, integrity, and a belief in the soundness of the materials. But she was not a sound material. She was a cheap facade, beautiful on the outside but lacking any core strength. She had seen my foundation not as something to build a life upon, but as a quarry to be plundered for her own selfish monument. And when I finally cut off her access to the raw materials, her monument collapsed into dust. A profound sense of peace washed over me, a quiet I hadn't felt in years. It was the silence of a completed project, the calm after a storm. My foundation was intact. It had been tested, stressed to its limits, but it had not broken. It was time to start designing something new, something for myself. And this time I would be much more careful about the materials I used.